This is Nutmeg Nation.
I have with me a very special guest. I'm excited to speak to him because he is the one person who has created a sculpture museum in Grenada, and he's added to it. It's one of National Geographic's 25 Wonders of the World, which is absolutely amazing. I have with me Jason DeCaires Taylor. Hi, Jason.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks.
And I see that we are a few hours apart. You're in the UK.
Yes, that's right. I'm in the southeast of England in my studio at the moment.
Oh, wow. So how's the studio looking? Is it messy?
It's always a little bit messy. Yeah, kind of goes through a period of chaos, and then we kind of sort it all out, and the sculptures get moved out, and then it kind of gets reset, and we go again. But yeah, at the moment it's looking good. Yeah, we're just embarking on a new project, so yeah, we have a bit of floor space available.
Oh, wow. So you're on to another project. So before we start to that project, I just want to know, you were born in the UK as well? You grew up there? Or tell me a little bit about Jason.
Yes, I was born in the UK. My mother is Guyanese, and she moved over from Guyana in her early 20s to study in England. Met my father, who's English, and then I sort of grew up here. But we were quite fortunate that my parents would sort of move around the world. They were both English teachers, and so we as a family, we moved all these different places in Malaysia and the Caribbean and in Spain. So, yeah, we sort of lived around. And likewise, I sort of, in my work, I've moved my studios around to different parts of the world. But at the moment, I've sort of returned back home and set up a base here.
So when you say the UK, are we talking London, England, or, I think it's like they say the UK, but United Kingdom. We're in the United Kingdom.
I'm just in the southeast, so just south of London, about 60 miles.
Oh, okay. The show is about Grenada and, the culture and everything like that. So you did create the first water park in 2006. What was the process like? What made you decide to start your journey in Grenada?
Well, I think it was just a sort of, it was the opportunity and the circumstances that led to me creating this park. I mean, I studied sculpture for a long time in London. I trained as a scuba diver. Worked in in sort of set design and logistics for some time, and I actually got a job in Grenada teaching diving just after Hurricane Ivan. And I was working there, and I kind of, when I was at art college, I always had this idea that I wanted to make different sculpture installations, in various sort of natural settings. And I was always fascinated by doing it underwater, but never really had the opportunity. But after a while, when I was living in Grenada, I saw that there was some, sites that it would really benefit doing something like this. And so I just sort of set about it. And I went to the government and asked permission and raised some funds and selected a site that had been damaged by the hurricane, so that if we added anything, in that site, it would actually attract people to it, and it would attract fish and tourists and would, hopefully regenerate it. And that's really sort of how it all began. And I kind of, started slowly, and it's really sort of progressed over the years.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, I've looked at the museums that you have around the world. It's quite a resume that you have. I think to go over everything that you've done, it would be forever in the making, but you have a lot of accolades, and I guess your parents must be really proud of everything that you've shown the world, especially the underwater world, for people who like scuba diving.
I think so.
Yeah, definitely. What was it about Grenada that you liked? I mean, a lot of people haven't been to Grenada, and I feel like it's a very small island, but it's a very friendly place, and it's beautiful. What was it like while you were teaching there?
Like I said, I've lived in a lot of places, and Grenada is a place that was really special to me. And I think if I hadn't have started if I started it somewhere else, it would have never have happened. It was definitely, obviously the the waters are beautiful and the sea and and the island itself is incredibly unique. But it was really the people that sort of were the ones that offered encouragement and were warm and were open. And I think ultimately gave you a sense of freedom to explore some of these ideas that, I probably wouldn't have done in other places. Certainly I do projects here in the UK, and there's so many barriers that are put up that, if I started, I would have just been put off, and even now I get, frustrated trying to implement projects where there's so many negative people who oppose them. But I was quite lucky in Grenada, I was afforded that freedom.
Are you able to talk about some of the difficulties that you have, like in the UK, or some of the challenges that you have to go through when you are starting a project or you have an idea?
Oh, how long's your podcast?
Oh, you know what? If this is going to be interesting, we will talk about it. I think it's important for people to know because it's like you're talking about a project that's underwater or just any idea in general. And the process is not always so easy. And that's why, sometimes it takes people years, right? To create an idea, to get it going. It's not just like, oh yeah, I get this person. Like, I mean, yeah, you have your team, but that's
Mhm.
just the surface, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, even on a basic level, so making objects for an underwater space, is very, very different to making sculptures on land. The materials have to be of a certain type. They can't pollute, obviously, the sea in any way. They have to be something that is extremely resilient, that is, transportable, and ultimately, provides a home for marine life. So there's loads of research and challenges trying to design pieces that are heavy enough to sit on the sea floor. Obviously, when you put an object in salt water, it becomes lighter. And in the Caribbean, there's lots of hurricanes and storms, so you need to make works that are not going to get dislodged or moved. So yeah, it's making works that are extremely heavy in the water, but not so heavy on land that you can't lift them up or transport them. That's the sort of basic stuff of just making the pieces. And then you've also, got the sort of difficulty of permitting. So you have lots of studies and surveys and consultations and, legislation to follow to actually be allowed to place sculptures in the sea. And then you've got, I think working in any sort of public space, and you probably people are very aware of this, from social media, but whenever you're working in a public arena, there's lots of opinions and groups and different parties that you need to try to satisfy as much as you can, and so that can be a challenge because we obviously all don't see the world, from the same viewpoint.
So, based on what you're saying, do you also have a science background? It sounds to me like it's not just creating the sculptures, just also knowing if this is going to work underwater, like just the spatial awareness and you're underwater. So, obviously, the weight of the sculpture. And I mean, even for the first one you created here, am I saying it right?
Molinaire, yeah.
Molinaire Underwater Sculpture Museum. The first one that you did, of course. And there's a lot of works. I've only looked at some of them. It's absolutely beautiful, but 75 works cover like 800 square meters. How long did that take you?
I think it took me a couple of years. I think it was about 2 years. And I was traveling back to the UK for additional work to help fund it. So yeah, I think I used to work in the UK for 3 months and then return to Grenada for 3 months. And my partner lived there and was at the university there. So yeah, it was definitely a lot of work, and I didn't have the same resources, obviously, that I employ now, and so everything was kind of done by hand. We would float sculptures out from the shoreline, and I would spend 2 weeks underwater bolting them all together and connecting them, and it was definitely a lot more hands-on. But then I look back on it now, and actually, it was some of the most fun and exciting parts of it. Now, I spend more time working on engineering drawings or permitting applications than I do sort of with the hands-on, working in the seaside.
You said it was exciting, the whole process, I guess, because it was more hands-on. What was exciting about it?
art for me is, all about exploration, and so I've always sort of explored the sea as a diver, but now I sort of was able to explore it through my art. So, as I place things underwater, I could watch them transition and change color and grow different forms and have, different corals and sponges and algae and all these different sort of, transformations happening. So it was really exciting to see, how they respond. I wasn't quite sure. And so each time I would slightly modify the designs. At the beginning, I did things very flat and close to the seabed. And as I got more confident and more, more able with the technique, I was able to stand things up and make them a bit more elevated. And as soon as you elevated them, they got more of the nutrient-rich current, so they really started to grow a lot more. But yeah, no, it was really fascinating to see. And I also probably I learned a lot in that first stage. I teamed up with an artificial reef company that also gave me a lot of advice on the best techniques to use. But yeah, it was fascinating seeing all the changes.
So it's kind of like a work in progress, like you were learning as you were creating.
I think I'm always learning. Every project, I start, it's always, very different conditions and different cultures and different environments. And yeah, so I don't think you ever get complacent where it's always the same. It's always a learning curve.
So your background, you went to university for sculpture design
Mm-hmm.
So you went to London Institute of Arts in 98 and you have a BA in sculpture. So what exactly did you learn while you were there?
Oh, lots of things. I mean, I specialized in casting. So I used to do a lot of life casting, body casting, mold making, armatures, all about public art and context and how that changes. So yeah, no, it was really, really good. I was really fortunate experience. I look back on it now and I sort of didn't appreciate it, being 19, 20. I didn't realize what an amazing opportunity it was. And I kind of look back now and think, God, if I could go back to university, it'd be incredible,
Would you
But
study
yeah,
the
no.
same thing if you went back?
Yeah, probably. It sounds like a dream now, but we just used to go into this huge college with this. Quite fortunate because it had some very interesting tutors, and they had a very different approach to things. And I always remember you go in and you were banned from having any desks or chairs. You
Why?
had
Sitting
to
on the
just
floor?
because they didn't want you to think on a desktop scale. They wanted you to think on a different scale.
And what does that mean on a
Um,
different scale? Like,
Well, you start on the floor, you get on a ladder, you look at it from a different perspective, and as a result, every student's work was very different. You could say that had influenced me now. Working underwater is on a very different scale to gallery work. I have to fill huge spaces, and the viewing is completely different. You don't walk around the seabed looking them at eye level. You float above them, you swim around them, and the sense of the areas that I need to cover for it to be a meaningful experience is really huge.
the one thing that's amazing, you are working underwater and being a scuba diver in order to do this kind of work. What is it like underwater? For those that have never been, I've never been underwater. What's it like doing work underwater?
Completely different. Much harder.
Mhm.
Definitely much harder. You got to plan it really well, make sure you have everything to hand, just pre-planned it all and sort of worked it out in your head exactly what's going to take place, because you can't really improvise or
So you have to
change your
plan
plan.
it. You have to plan it. The experience itself, do you enjoy? I mean, you must enjoy working underwater, obviously, but I want to know, what does it feel like? You're underwater. It's not like going swimming, right?
No,
You're
no, it's
immersed
definitely not like
underwater.
swimming. No.
No, it's not. What I want to know is the feeling. What does it feel like when you're in that environment and planning where the sculptures go, and the whole process, having your team send you the next sculpture and bringing it down? What does it feel like in terms of gravitational pull? What is the experience that you get when you're there?
Oh, I mean, there's many different phases to what I do underwater. First of all, there'll just be the sort of choosing the right location. So that's all about sort of taking in the atmosphere, looking at the sediment type, sort of visualizing how the piece will fit within the topography of what's down there. That's, a really, really nice experience. I mean, first of all, being underwater, it's not, you really obviously have to control your breathing. So you're very conscious that you have to have very regular breaths and very controlled breaths. And your movements have to be, much less frenetic than when you're on land. So I think you instantly, feel calmer and feel more clear-headed. And so there's that first part, which is quite interesting. Then the sort of actual installation, that's a kind of very different experience where, first of all, you're really conscious of safety. So you're, really aware of where you are in the water, that, there's not a sculpture that's above your head coming down on top of you. You're not tangled up in any way, or that it's safe and in control. So that's generally quite, I wouldn't say stressful, but that's certainly there's a lot of pressure on it, because you've also hired a lot of people and a lot of logistics and boats, and it's, something that's can only be done when the weather's at a, good, basically. So yeah, that's quite pressurized, that part. And then later on, once that's done, there's usually sort of the sort of fixing stage of it. So it's putting in the anchor parts and, checking the composition of it, checking things are level. And, I tend to do a lot of that. And, I do really enjoy it, being underwater. It's just, sound is completely different. The light is different. It's very, very peaceful, but it's also on a clock. So,
Right.
you've
Yeah.
only got a certain amount of air that will last you, an hour and a half, 2 hours. You're also, absorbing nitrogen, that you've got a limit to how long you can spend under. So yeah, it's not completely carefree, but done it quite a while now. So I sort of quite laid
You're a
back about it.
veteran. Yeah, you're a veteran now. I mean, these are all the components that people don't necessarily think about. I mean, if I were to go under there, I'm just like in awe of all the sculptures and how amazing they look, and just like the whole, it's a different world, when you think about it. And so I think the next thing that we need to discuss is the newest installation that you've added in Grenada, which is amazing because it's devoted to spice mass. And the sculptures that you created for the newest edition have to do with an event that happens every year in Grenada. It's very popular. It's one of their biggest tourist attractions, right? So what was the
Yes, yeah,
inspiration
yeah.
behind the new installation that you created last year?
We just wanted to make something that was incredibly unique to Grenada. We wanted to have images and iconography that is of things that can only be found on the island of Grenada. And Carnival has such incredible stories and such incredible masqueraders that we thought it'd be really good to capture. And so, yes, I worked with some local artists, and, we designed these 5 different characters and decorated them all differently with these new underwater paints. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how they evolve.
You said how they evolved, like the sculptures change over time, or just,
Oh yes, of course, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. How they're, we got some of the sort of feathers on the pretty mass dancer. That we got the horns on the jab jab. All of these things are going to start to heavily be colonized by sponges and corals and things. So yeah, it's going to look very different each year.
As far as sculpture design is concerned, you say you have a team. Did someone help you create the design for the sculptures, or do you draw them? You're mainly your designs, or you've done them yourself, or is it like you have someone that helps you when you're creating?
It depends. I mean, most of the time, mostly designs by myself. This particular installation, so this Coral Carnival, that was in collaboration with a local designer and some local artists. So together we worked out, that each of the characters, the correct type of costumes and objects they were holding, and the different designs. And that's probably a little bit different to how I normally work. Normally, I come up with a concept from the beginning to the end.
What was that like, having someone else contribute to your creation?
To be honest, I'm always sort of working with the underwater world, which is in itself is, has its own artists that, decorate and change and morph things. So I'm kind of used to sort of letting go a little bit of control anyway. And it was a nice experience for sure.
So you created 25 stylized sculptures. Do you have a favorite?
It depends. I mean, each one of them was also modeled on a local Grenadian person. And the model I used for one of them, called the wild Indian sculpture, I just really liked the way he came out. He just had a really stolic, proud expression, and yeah, I kind of liked how that came out. The jab was quite interesting. Again, the model was really good, and the form with the snake and with the horns, yeah, had a really good silhouette underwater. Really invited people to come and find out more and ask questions.
This one is kind of, I think it's cool. The one where he's sitting and he's typing on the typewriter.
Yeah, that was one of the first sculptures that I actually produced when I first started, called The Lost Correspondent.
Oh, wow.
And when I first made it, I made it from a type of metal that didn't last very long underwater. So it actually started to degrade over time. And then obviously since then, I've upgraded my techniques a lot. And so I actually revamped that sculpture and recast elements of it.
Like you said, they change over time, like every year that changes. And so it will be interesting to see what the coral carnival looks like in a few years from now, like how the sculpture will look and how much coral will be there and like what attracts it, right? Because I mean, obviously it's underwater. And so the composition doesn't stay the same, right?
No, it changes. It's interesting talking about that first piece as well, the Lost Correspondent. I think that was the piece that really sort of ignited my imagination and made that piece. Kind of saw it. I saw this desk and I saw this kind of writer and I saw the space that it would work, and it was like this sort of corridor underwater that opened up into this little clear opening which had amazing white sand and sort of sunbeams coming through, and there was kind of corals growing up walls on the side of it. And I just sort of thought of him in this space, and I made it and installed it, and it instantly worked. And just on land it kind of felt meaningless, but just putting it underwater was what gave it this sense of mystery. Wasn't entirely, was it a sort of modern art experience? Was it an archaeological experience? Who were we? Where are we going? It kind of asked all these different questions which it didn't have on land.
I guess it's one of those things where you're getting it inspired. Obviously, the second addition to the underwater museum is more to do with carnival itself. But the first one, what was the meaning behind that? Because obviously that's your claim to fame.
There were lots of different sculptures in that collection in the first work. So the most sort of well known is this piece called Vicissitudes, which is a ring of children.
Yes, that's one of my favorites. I love that.
That was one of the first pieces, part of the first set that I made in the early 2000s, and again it was cast from children on the island, and it was put near this sort of in this white patch of sand that had this kind of really nice current that came through it. And I kind of wanted to show how children absorb and change and adapt to their environment and their situations, and they grow on the nutrition that they have. And so that was quite interesting, that each different children grew at different rates and changed in different ways. And some had incredible big sort of pink sponges that came out in every direction. And others had a sort of, white fur that came out. And others had a kind of golden fire coral that went up their legs and arms. So yeah, that was one of the first pieces and kind of captures people's imaginations.
Someone described it as something out of a Stephen King novel.
Well, it's interesting, I mean that particular piece, it's been so many different people have interpreted it in different ways, and some people have looked at it in from a scary point of view, and they see that this people underwater as connected to drowning.
Oh,
There's been a
wow.
lot of people that have also connected it to, people that have died during the Middle Passage.
Hmm.
So there's other people that have thought about it as, as a, coral reef and a diving experience, and children that, are changing. Other people that see it as a big, real sense of unity and, connection. So, yeah, for me, I think that's the whole sort of reason for art, is it evokes a different response from each viewer.
Art is always interpretive, and you've done so much all over the world, like, Grenada, Mexico, Bahamas, the UK, Australia. How come you haven't gotten anything here in Canada?
I would love to do something in Canada. Definitely, We did have a project at one point working in a river, which was quite exciting. But yeah, unfortunately, it didn't happen in the end. But it's the same in America. I also haven't got any works there, and that because the permitting is pretty stringent and takes a
Wow.
long time.
Well, I hope you do it, Jason. Your work is beautiful because of social media. I think it kind of ignited the art world, especially because there's this one group that you work with. I don't know if you necessarily collaborate with them necessarily, but they're the ones that coordinate the scuba diving part of the underwater museum. They're the ones that train people on how to scuba dive, and they have that's a whole different thing altogether, but that's part of the whole experience, is going underwater and scuba diving to get there and learning how to do that if you've never done it before. So where I'm going with this is that because of them, the social media, like their Facebook and the Instagram, I was just like, wow, this is so amazing, because they've done a lot of videos, like mini videos. And I'm like, for me, I'm not really a big swimmer, but it's one of those things where I feel when I go back home to Grenada to visit, that I would consider doing it because it's so beautiful. Why did you get into sculpture design?
I don't know. I think I was I was always into art, and I think it was just probably the thing I was best at that came naturally. Yeah, I was a bit of a graffiti artist when I was young, and so I was always
Oh,
either painting or making or creating something. So it was really quite a kind of natural progression.
did you ever get in trouble for doing some of that graffiti?
I did in the beginning, yeah, yeah. But again, I kind of like it was working in outside in a public space. Again, it was I sort of look back on some of the things I've done in my life, and they always feed in into what I've made in some way. Well, at the time I never really realized, but all the experiences you have, they all obviously sort of shape you, and they all become relevant. Everything you do is relevant. It all kind of works out.
Yeah, it's your history. It's a part of who you are, because both your parents are teachers. So what was that like? Do you feel like they kind of helped you to get to that point, when you chose your specialty in university? I mean, that's not the typical thing that people study in school.
I'm very fortunate. They're very open parents, and very and afforded me a lot of freedom. They never dictated what I should do or how I should do it. They took me around the world and let me explore, have lots of different experiences, and I'm very lucky to have that.
And what's one of the memories that you have that just stays with you now?
I mean, they're the ones that introduced me to this sort of underwater world. I lived in Malaysia when I was a kid, and every weekend we'd go snorkeling and swimming, and I got to see incredible things when I was like 7 years old. So yeah,
Wow.
they definitely planted the seed.
They did. I was just talking about this with someone about your brain, like the way you are. We as a human race, the things that you do when you're younger lead the path to your future. They planted the seed, and that was something that was a highlight in your life, right? And so that's probably helped you decide what your career would be like, and the fact that they let you have that freedom to do so, which is the most important thing. Because as an artist, they always say, artists are starving because it's a passion. It doesn't pay the bills. I talked to someone the other day. She was telling me, like, her husband is an engineer, but his passion is comedy. So he has a podcast, and her parents have taught her that you can't live off of your passions. You have to have something else. And so with you, did you have something to back up on, or has this, you've just decided that this is what you're going to devote your life to?
As part of the conflict that I had, when I finished art college, I became super disillusioned by the opportunities that were out there, and working out how to pay your rent and
Right.
and do anything in your life. It was really, really demoralizing. And it still is in some ways. It's still really tough. It's such a competitive space, the arts, and there's so little resources to go around that it's still pretty hard. And so after I graduated, I did lots of other different jobs, for probably like 10 years, 12 years. But it was only in sort of when I was in Grenada that I thought, actually, I'm going to do something that, I feel passionate and interested in. And I didn't give it a long, I just thought this is going to be, a couple of years and an experimentation. I didn't have a kind of plan of where it would end up. And it still probably took me 10 years before I started getting paid for it
Wow.
properly,
And no one knows
So
that. You know what I mean? That's the thing. Like when you're an artist and like you're doing all this stuff, no one knows like what the journey is like getting there. So obviously you were getting funding and doing other things to pay the bills, right?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, for the first 5 years, definitely, I was having to sort of do other jobs to fund it. Then after 5 years, I was probably just sort of making enough, to survive from it. And it takes a while. And even now, sort of, how many years? I mean, 20 years in, I get a lot of requests for different projects, but some still sort of fall by the wayside. It's definitely a hell of a lot easier. It's a difficult space. The arts is a very thin percentage of the population that can make a good living from it.
It's just like amazing what you've done and what you've created. And I hope that this episode inspires more people around the world to go to Grenada. I hope that it will inspire or motivate them to go and see what you've created, because it's amazing, right? And that what you've done, and the fact that it is considered your first exhibit, the one you did in 2006, one of the 25 wonders of the world, to be at the height, to have that as one of your accolades. Like, what did it feel when they actually said, like, this is National Geographic named it that? What was that like?
Oh, I mean, it was obviously, incredible. And I was quite stunned. But at the same time, they also listed some of the other attractions, and there was a few little ones on there, like the Himalayas and the Great Wall of China. And I was like, it's definitely not quite as impressive as those. But yeah, no, it was great to be recognized. In fact, actually, yesterday they just also named Grenada one of the top 20 cultural destinations of 2024.
Well, look at that, it's amazing. For those who are artists and sometimes you get discouraged, what do you say to them?
Just got to do what is meaningful for yourself. You're one shot on this planet, and to be trapped into something that is just about survival, it's definitely got to follow your passion and do something that's meaningful for you.
You know what, Jason? It always comes back. Even for me, this idea I thought about it when I graduated from college. I just didn't start it. And then when the world changed, the pandemic, I'm like, I have time now. I might as well do it. There's no more excuses, because the thing that we always say, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. Or no, when things are better. Mm-hmm. There's never going to be a better time, so that's true.
I think there's also there's a real balance in your age as well. When you're young and in your 20s, and you have the energy and the sort of drive to really do exciting things, you sort of put it off maybe and think I'll do it later on in life. But then when you're later on in life, you usually have lots of commitments and responsibilities, and you don't have the same energy you had. So I think it's definitely foolish to wait. You really just have to begin.
Just start the process. Yeah. This is amazing. I'm Carlene. This is Nutmeg Nation with Jason DeCaires Taylor. Thank you so much, Jason.
Been a pleasure.